Good morning, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks, everyone, for joining us this morning. My name is Warren Miller with Fountain Works, part of the team that's working with the Department of Transportation on NC Transit Cares. And I want to welcome everyone and just get us oriented to a few things before we get started. So this is the second of our 3 meetings, and just give you a bit of a preview of our agenda. We're going to recap the project and the goals. We are going to hear from a couple of great speakers.
Okay, so we need to get, let's go ahead and
We're going to hear from a couple of great speakers about understanding the spread of COVID, a great best practice on contactless fare payment. And then we're going to have a chance to give you more opportunity to learn about the innovations that you helped generate in the first meeting and give you a chance to prioritize those. And then we'll be wrapping up. That's a big picture orientation to what we'll be doing, and we'll get into this a little bit more. So one thing I'll ask is that if folks, if you could, go ahead and keep yourself on mute so we don't have background noise. We've got a big group today. So you can just go to the bottom of your screen and you've got that little microphone there. You can mute yourself, unmute yourself. We would love for folks to start their video. Again, you can do that at the bottom of your screen, and you can scroll over that video camera icon and turn it on. And that really just helps us connect, but especially when we're in our breakout sessions. If there is something that you need, you can go ahead and put that in the chat function. If you have technical support that you need, go ahead and you can send a message to the Fountain Works team, and they can respond to you with any technical issues that you have. And if for some reason you need to leave the meeting, you can go ahead and hit the leave meeting at the end. Just a couple of ground rules that'll help us get started. We really appreciate everyone's time, making the time to participate in this meeting. We would love to have your full attention. We recognize that there may be some tech challenges. We're going to embrace them, but we'll make sure that we get through it. Again, keep yourself on mute. And when we get into breakouts in particular, we really hope that you will all take advantage of this time and be able to speak up and share your opinions, because that's really what we want to be able to do, is get your input on these innovations that you help generate. We are going to take a break in the middle of this, so we would like you to get up and stretch. That's our last ground rule. So just a couple things that will help us work better together. And with that, I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to Deputy Secretary Julie White for opening remarks. Thank you.
Thanks, Warren. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Great. So good morning, everyone. It's actually a super beautiful, starting to feel like fall morning, but my kids reminded me last night that this is in North Carolina, of our 12 seasons, this is fake fall. So get out and enjoy it. As my kids reminded me, it's temporary. I am thrilled to be with you all this morning and bringing you greetings on behalf of our governor, our secretary, and our chief deputy secretary. We are really excited to continue this conversation with you today about the impacts of COVID-19 and how we can work together to respond to this ever-evolving challenge. Thank you for everyone who attended our first meeting in July. I know I learned a lot about the particular challenges y'all are facing and the solutions that you're developing, and we're really grateful for those insights. I particularly enjoyed the breakout groups because in a smaller group setting, I got the chance to kind of delve a little deeper. And we are using what we're learning in these meetings, not only to develop the content for this particular project, but also to inform our work as a unit of DOT going forward. So thank you for your participation in this. As Jim will highlight in a few moments, we heard some common themes in the first meeting as to challenges and solutions. And those included keeping passengers and operators safe, offsetting declining ridership by making riders feel comfortable and safe and therefore returning to transit, restoring lost revenue and funding, and then looking at new service models as needs evolve. The key objective today is to take those themes and ideas generated from our first meeting and determine what our priorities are for implementation. So we want to hear from you about which initiatives are the most important for your system, both short-term and then long-term. As you think about your priorities, we also want to make sure that we're going forward with ideas that can be operationalized. For each theme and innovation, what do implementation strategy activities look like, and how do we ensure success? We hope to use today's input along with follow-up discussions to develop a library of ideas, strategies, and best practices, as well as actionable policy recommendations and projects. Again, I want to thank you for your participation today. I know many of you face unprecedented challenges and have really stepped up to continue serving customers effectively. Your role is so very important, and we appreciate your commitment to public transportation and the important role you play in access to opportunities and services. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Warren.
Great, thank you. Would like to introduce Jim Westmoreland.
Hey, good morning, everybody, and thank you again for letting me be a member of the project team that's working on this with NCDOT. I wanted to, again, thank and recognize Julie for her outstanding leadership with this project and sort of moving it forward. Today, we're joined by not only the 98 transit systems from across the state, but we're also joined by some MPO and RPO representatives. When we had our initial kickoff meeting of the Initiative Development Committee back in February of this year, one of the important things that they noted was the role of MPOs and RPOs and bringing them into the fold of the project. When we get to the point of implementation, which we're moving towards, and I'll go through that here in a minute, it will be important that they're completely plugged into different ideas that might have both local and statewide value and application as it relates to TIPs and the like. So welcome to the MPO and RPO representatives that are with us this morning. Next slide, please. Just a quick review of the purpose and approach and also the goals. As Julie mentioned, you know, this process is really designed about and around the NC transit systems and really the response that's out there and ongoing to COVID-19. I think we all know that it's a very interesting and different time that we're living in. And I know that you all as local transit systems, both in terms of your operations and the impacts and the funding and the impacts, have really been impacted by this whole COVID situation. The second thing that we're really focused on is how we listen to you and use both your good ideas and areas that you want to research in terms of new ideas and help to advance both on a local basis and a statewide basis things that are important for us to continue to work on in responding to COVID-19. Next slide, please. So really the project goals are to find ways to more effectively respond and work with each one of you in terms of how you're responding to COVID, and hopefully with that, identify new strategies and innovations that will help in that response going forward. And also, you know, as we continue to have other things that happen with transit in the future, have an ability to handle those disruptions. And then finally, and this was important to Julie and the whole NCDO team, was how all of this work sort of nests in with other past plans and projects that have been done with DOT. So for those of you who had the opportunity to participate in the 2018 strategic plan for public transportation, you'll know there were some specific elements in there related to everything from innovation technology, regional connections, and how those things sort of work into this project. Next slide, please. So just a quick refresh on where we're at with the project schedule. As we mentioned, today is our work on it meeting. And effectively, there's been some advanced work done by each one of you that I'll go through here in a minute in terms of getting us where we're at today. We are, between now and November, going to be focused on working on what hopefully will be the output or outcome of today's meeting, which will be the top 8 innovation ideas that we'll develop implementation plans for, and really focused on the Launch It meeting coming up on November the 18th, which is a different date. You may want to go ahead and put that on your calendar. Initially, we had an earlier date in November, and unfortunately, it conflicted with the upcoming elections, and we have moved that out to November the 18th from 9 until noon. That will be a virtual meeting. We had initially talked about that being an in-person meeting, but due to the current situation and wanting to have as much participation as we can from the systems and different representatives who would be involved. We're going to make that a virtual meeting as well. Next slide, please. So I think this is a good graphic that sort of explains the process of NC Transit Cares and where we're at and the different components of it. You all may remember back in June of this year, we sent out an initial survey to all systems asking for areas of impact and challenges, new innovations and ideas, and existing innovations and ideas. At our Kick It Off meeting on July the 22nd, we spent some time talking about those existing innovations and networking and sharing information with each other. We talked about the new ideas that have been generated from that I'll go through here in just a minute. Today's meeting, as Warren mentioned, is really focused on how we take this grouping of what are now 19 different ideas and sort of get them down to a top 8. And we'll talk more about that process as we move forward, but really moving towards the Launch It meeting in November, which will be the place that we'll effectively go through and start talking about the implementation of the different items that are the top priorities, how that works in terms of potential DOT support, and certainly your support going forward to more completely look at those ideas and how they're implemented. Next slide, please. So next slide, please. So as Julie mentioned, there were 4, as you recall from the first meeting, we initially had our breakout groups where all of the systems who were of similar type were broken out into different breakout groups. So if you were a community rural system, you were in one group. If you were a small urban system, you were in one group. If you were an urban system, you were in a separate group. So we went through and we looked at the results of the first meeting. Effectively, what we found was there were a lot of similar ideas out there about what people wanted to know more about, what they wanted to explore with this process. So effectively, we've got 4 different challenge areas, and we'll break people out into challenge areas today based off of hopefully what you asked for in terms of your top 1 or top, the second priority. So the 4 areas, as Julie mentioned, are 1, how can we keep passengers and employees safe? Number 2, how can we offset ridership declines due to COVID-19? Number 3, how can we restore revenues and funding lost as a result of COVID-19? And number 4, how can we move to new service patterns as needs evolve? Next slide, please. So as we go through this first set of slides, you'll see that these different innovations are defined in terms of short-term, mid-term, long-term. This just provides a basis of the dates that we're looking at in terms of short-term. So short-term innovations and strategies have the ability to be implemented between today through December the 31st. Midterm, basically from January 1st to June the 30th of next year, and then long-term, July 1st and beyond. These are just sort of suggested timelines in terms of what we see relative to work requirements for the follow-up on the different innovation ideas. Next slide, please. So this is how the first focus area broke out. There were 5 different innovations identified for that. You can see on the slide about how we keep passengers and employees safe. One of the first items there is about establishing partnerships with others. You'll hear in just a minute a speaker from UNC School of Public Health. NCDOT has provided some leadership in connecting them with that. We also know at the first meeting there was a lot of discussion around how can we connect with other groups to share information between systems. The second innovation there is about transit cleaning accreditation program. Somebody brought that up in a small group, and a couple of people also brought that up about how do we look at establishing a system with NC Transit Systems that basically looks at sort of the standard of cleaning practices that could also be used to help provide some level of comfort to the traveling public about what we're doing in terms of cleaning practices. Contactless fares or fare elimination systems was something that was also mentioned in there as a midterm strategy. You'll hear again a speaker this morning from the Triangle area talking about some of the work that they're doing there with contactless fares and fare elimination. Air filtration systems was a big one relative to bus operations and sanitation technologies. Vehicle design changes. There was a lot of conversation around social distancing and what that might mean relative to future design of vehicles. Also, elements of plexiglass between drivers and passengers and other things that may fold into more long-term design of vehicles. Slide, please. second focus challenge was how can we offset ridership declines due to COVID-19? And there's 4 different innovations that came out of that. The first one had to do with new marketing techniques and strategies. How do we really capitalize on those things that we're both already doing as existing systems and practices in North Carolina, and things that we might be able to research and find out there that are going on domestically. Evaluate new service opportunities. There was some discussion around things that were being done in other parts of the state that would present new service opportunities that might be a good point of collaboration between systems and or evaluation of other things that might make a difference. Real-time app for surveying passengers. We know that there's a lot of concern about how we keep and maintain that level of trust and security with our passengers, and this was thought to be a potential application possibility to get more information directly real-time from passengers around things that they needed, their feelings about being safe and secure on vehicles. And then technologies to enhance service delivery flexibility in post-COVID-19 environment. Hold on one second. Nothing like live TV when your lights go out. Next slide, please. The third area there is how can we restore revenues and fundings lost as a result of COVID-19. There's 5 different innovations that came out of that we'll talk about in the breakout groups. One was statewide and regional procurement models, effectively looking at how do we identify needs and sort of look at both state and regional bulk purchasing kinds of opportunities that might end up in reducing the cost of items for systems. Agency cash models to minimize impacts to revenues. There was some discussion around different cash models that agencies have and how that potentially could serve as a resource to help identify best practices out there from a revenue perspective. Improve data to demonstrate the impacts of funding reductions. I know before we started this meeting, I was talking with David Rue about some of the challenges that are being faced out there right now from a funding perspective, and a need for demonstrating on an ongoing basis, both locally and on the state to the State General Assembly, about the impacts of transit, both the positives and the negatives from a funding perspective. Regional partnerships and ride sharing. We know that there's different things that are going out there between different counties and county systems that might be of value to other systems to know and have. And then additional COVID-19 funding and or strategies for funding flexibility. We know that whether it's FTA, NCDOT, there may be programs, there may be policies out there that could be looked at and examined to provide more flexibility about how funding can be used in the future. Next item, please. So how can we move to new service patterns as needs evolve? There were 5 different innovations identified here. Expand the use of microtransit and on-demand service models. There's some of that ongoing already in the state that we feel might be a good model for other systems to look at and also to adopt. Statewide technology deployment and integration. Julie and the NCDOT really focused on how do they collaboratively come together and look at using the resources of the state to develop options that other systems could take advantage of, and sort of driving that forward from the perspective of different both technologies and integration of technologies that are out there. Scheduling and forecasting innovations. There's been a lot of discussion around people scheduling trips and what does that mean? What does that look like in the future? You know, my classic example is maybe with paratransit services in the future, people are going online to schedule the trips, and it shows where seats may be available, sort of like when you're going to book an airline seat available for ride. Mobility for all pilot. Again, there's some work going on in that space with NCDOT and other local systems. And then mobility as a service, which continues to evolve and may have some practical applications in terms of both service efficiency and cost going forward. Next slide, please. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Glenn Morrison this morning. Glenn is a professor of environmental sciences and engineering at the Gilliam School of Global Public Health at UNC Chapel Hill. I know that Julie and the team at NCDOT have established a relationship with the UNC Chapel Hill School of Public Health. And I believe that Glenn will share some important and interesting information this morning about different ideas and strategies for really understanding and limiting the spread of COVID-19 in transit vehicles. So Glenn, welcome.
Thank you. All right, so thank you very much, Jim and Warren. I'm, as Jim said, I'm a professor at the UNC Gilliam School of Public Health. specifically in the environmental sciences and engineering program. I'm an engineer, but I also work in this broad space of indoor air quality, particles in air, health associated with indoor air quality, chemistry, all kinds of things like that. And the Gilliam School is working in many aspects of COVID research. And I'll talk today about transmission, what we know about the transmission of COVID, of actually the virus that causes COVID, and how that influences how we go forward in making decisions about how to prevent COVID in various spaces. All right. So virus transmission is primarily thought to occur by these 4 pathways. Many of you have probably seen these kinds of figures before in the news, but clearly direct contact, you can transfer a virus from one person to another just by hand touching. There's this idea of indirect contact, this fomite pathway you may have heard of, and this is really just touching something that somebody else has touched. And also close range. We'll talk a little bit more about this large droplet transmission. But mostly what we're going to talk about today is this one, this aerosol close and long range transmission, which we're coming to realize is a very important part of the transmission process, as long as we've kind of taken care of some of these other pathways with the more traditional methods of hygiene and distancing. We have other strategies to deal with the aerosol transmission component. So aerosols are actually just little teeny solids or particles that are suspended in air. We segregate these two in a kind of approximate way based on whether they will drop quickly out of the air or not quickly drop out of the air. So rain droplets in general are basically liquid droplets that are maybe 20 micrometers or larger. A micrometer is one millionth of a meter. And so a raindrop is around 100, can be 100 micrometers or so, or a little bigger, even up to a millimeter. They drop out quite quickly, and so they don't go very far. However, aerosols are pretty much anything smaller than this, and they range from 20 down to very, very much less than 1 micron. And you can see different size ranges here. For a human hair is about 50 microns. The particles that we worry about for air pollution is what's called PM2.5 and PM10 are about 2.5 microns and smaller, or 10 microns and smaller. So the aerosol size is really important when we're looking at several components of airborne transmission. One is how long does it stay in the air? The longer it can stay in the air without falling out, the more it can kind of just hang out in the air and move about a space like a building or a bus or a car. One thing is that the virus is rarely or almost never basically by itself in air. It doesn't look like this in air. The virus actually looks like this. It's inside a respiratory fluid sphere, particle in a sense, and generally maybe around 0.5 microns or larger in size. And this is important not just because of the time it spends in the air, but also the size tells us where it will deposit in the respiratory system. So this is a figure that shows research done by a colleague of ours in Australia, Lydia Maraska, a few years ago, in which she measured how many of these particles are being generated by people doing different things like breathing, speaking, and singing, and coughing. And one thing that they learned was that a very large amount of the particles that are generated, a large volume of the particles, is generated in a size mode that stays suspended in air for a long time. And so if you look on this scale, this is basically the intensity, how much is coming out. Think of it that way, it's just how much. But on this scale, this is the diameter. It's on a log scale, so maybe it's a little bit hard to read, but you notice that this one here, that most of the particles, this peak here occurs somewhere a little less than 1 microns, or about 0.8 microns. And so this tells us that a lot of the particles are actually able to stay suspended in air for a long time, because this particle size will stay suspended in air for many, many hours. It's a very persistent particle size. Now, it doesn't mean that the virus is persistent. That's another question about how viable is a virus for that long. But the particles themselves can stay suspended for a long time. And so this is just reiterating kind of the same idea that for large droplets, let's say when you cough, you do produce a lot of these very large droplets. They actually don't go very far. If you're near somebody who coughs, you certainly are going to be in the line of fire. But those droplets have what are called a ballistic pathway. They just kind of go out and they fall to the ground pretty quickly. And if you're outside that zone, then you're probably not going to get hit by that droplet. And this is in part where our 6-foot rule comes from. Yes, the 6-foot rule is kind of a rough estimate of a kind of a safe space, but it's actually not bad. It actually is meaningful, at least for this kind of transfer of droplets. But most of the particles that are generated by somebody breathing, coughing, talking, actually are in a mode that stays suspended for a long time, and you can think of them as like fine smoke. So anybody in a space, in the same space with you, can be affected by that. The spaces that are most problematic are going to be the ones that are enclosed, poorly ventilated, and have a higher number of people who are infected, of course. So let's take a look at this, because it turns out that even though we know that these aerosols are there, they're persistent, it doesn't mean that the viruses spread this way, because viruses each virus is different, and they may not survive very long in an aerosol. They may survive a long time on a surface, but not in an aerosol, or vice versa, depending on the actual virus itself. So what's happened over the past, since January, is that a lot of data has been collected in a variety of different ways, but most of this is what we think of as epidemiological research. And this research is coming to the conclusion that aerosols are an important pathway for this transmission. So in one paper, I won't go into the details, but this group studied a large number of super spreader events around the world. And one thing that was very clear about this is that it was 20 times or 18 times more likely that these super spreader events started in an indoor environment. This by itself tells us that if you have a large crowd outdoors and a large crowd indoors, you're much more likely to get the virus, to contract the virus from somebody who is sick, and that is transporting probably through the air by an aerosol pathway. This picture shows a dinner in China in which a group in Hong Kong evaluated this in great detail. They actually had video of this from surveillance cameras, or security cameras. And they studied the airflow in this building with chemical tracers and computational fluid dynamics, and they concluded that all the people got sick in this zone because of aerosol transport. There was another one that many of you have probably heard of, the Skagit Valley Choir incident, in which although people had done their best to avoid contact with one another, they already knew about the coronavirus. The pandemic was starting to occur at this time. Almost everybody got sick, even though they were trying not to be near each other or touch each other. And it's because they were singing and there was a lot of emissions of aerosols and everybody was breathing those aerosols. There was a study just published this week which is quite relevant to this group, and this is a aerosol transmission on a bus. And this was early in the pandemic, before it was clear there was a pandemic, and this was in China. And a group of people going to a Buddhist retreat were on a bus. It was a 100-minute round trip. And I won't go into all the details of how they were able to figure out who got sick and how and do the contact tracing. But what they learned is that there were 2 buses. One bus had an index patient, the person who was sick on the bus, the first person. And the other bus didn't. Other people on one bus got sick. And you can see that all the ones that are here in reddish and yellow and green, those are the people who got sick. The ones in the white here are people who are sitting on the bus who did not get sick. But one thing you can notice is that there's no real pattern. Although they actually did a statistical analysis and found that there's no increased probability of getting sick because you were near this person. And that's probably because the air moving around the bus basically transported the aerosols quite readily. This bus nobody was wearing masks. I should note that. and the bus was not intentionally ventilated, and it was very densely packed with with people. And so they were doing it without knowing it. Of course, it was before we knew what about the COVID crisis, but they were doing all the things you wouldn't want to do to prevent the virus from spreading. So there's a lot of evidence, and like I said, I can't go into all of it here. That would take many hours. But if you look at the possibility of transmission from what we know about the transmission of this virus, that there's very little evidence that droplets are the cause. This droplet, like coughing on somebody, is causing this. There's more evidence of what's called fomite transmission, that touching things that other people have touched is causing this, is part of the process of transfer of the virus. But the most evidence we have is for aerosols, and it's actually quite strong evidence. So what does that mean? Well, it's somewhat intuitive. The first most important thing is source control. Masks are incredibly effective. Everything we see shows us that when you put masks on people, something that could have been a super spreader event goes away entirely. So if everybody is masked, this makes a big difference. Dilution, ventilation, filtration, any of these things that can reduce the concentration in air is an effective way to reduce transmission. Keeping people distance is still important. There is data showing that when you are closer, there is a higher probability of getting sick. So you definitely want to keep people, and the 6 foot number is still okay for that, but it's not sufficient. You still need these other measures. Contact time is really important, minimizing the time in contact with somebody who might be sick. And so for short bus rides, maybe this is a good thing because people spend less time maybe on a bus rather than they spend in other places with other people. And then there's what's called receptor control, the masks that you wear to prevent yourself from getting sick, of course. So with that in mind, there's a nice figure by some folks that wrote a paper recently in which they just kind of give this in a qualitative way, which just kind of tells you what you want to do to prevent the virus from spreading. You want to stay away from high occupancy, poorly ventilated spaces with no face covering.
Hey, Ashley.
You want to go to low occupancy, well ventilated, face masked, and maybe not singing. It turns out the difference between speaking and singing is a factor of 10. If you're singing or shouting, you increase the emissions of the virus by a factor of 10. It's a huge difference. So there are a lot of risk simulators available, or not a lot, I should say there's a handful of them out there that you can try, and I've put a couple here, and if you're interested, you can certainly make this available, but they're out there. You can kind of play around them and see what your risk is for different situations, and it could be in a room, a classroom, it could be in an office, it could be in a bar. They've got a bunch of different scenarios that you can try. I kind of like the one at Duke because it's a statistical model, but it's maybe not as easy to understand at the first two, unless you really dig in deep. The other one, this one on the left, is a little easier to understand. So I used those models. I have my own models as well, but I use this model, that same type of model, I should say, to do a quick analysis of what might occur on a bus if you have and I just chose some parameters somewhat based on my own experience. I didn't go into the details of bus routes and what kind of shifts people had. But if you take a typical bus driver who's in a 6-month period is driving for 4 hours a day, we can actually calculate or estimate the probability of infection given things like information about the bus, air leakage, and the community infection rate, how many people actually have an infection in a community. And if we go ahead and assume that we have normal hygiene and distancing, so we're not considering that in the simulation, we can come up with a number of the infection probability for that bus driver. I don't show the number here because there's a lot of uncertainty associated with this. I'll say it out loud, it's about 50%. So the bus driver has a 50% chance of being sick if the average number of people on their bus is 40 and it's operating normally, but nobody's wearing masks and all the windows are closed. So it's a high risk infection rate, but it's kind of the worst case scenario. But if you take and just start doing things like reduce occupancy, Well, reducing occupancy from 40 to 10 passengers reduces your risk by a factor of 2. Having everybody wear masks is roughly the same improvement. Have windows open. This could include using filtration. It kind of depends on what's going on and how good the filtration is, but generally speaking, increasing ventilation of fresh air also is effective. But each one of these is individually effective. Putting them all together, you get a vast improvement, greater than a factor of 10 reduction of risk to the driver. I should say though, this is the driver who's spending all this time in a bus with the community, right? The community is constantly coming and going in the bus. For passengers, the risk is much, much smaller individually because basically they spend much less time in the bus. And so their risk is somewhere down here to begin with, and then gets much better even still because of all the measures that you take. So this is basically my last slide. I just wanted to mention that there's a lot of people working on this at UNC, and there's a lot of folks working together who have a wide variety of expertise. And so I'm just one. And so there's a lot of people that you could talk to about this, and they will tell you basically the same story, but maybe from a slightly different perspective. And so I encourage you to reach out to some of them as well. So thank you, and that's all I had to say today. Now, Warren, should I unshare this?
Yes, that would be great. Thank you, Glenn.
Sure. I have to figure out how to do that first. I think I see it here. Stop share.
That's okay. I can do it for you.
I think I did it. Yeah.
Yep. So thanks, Glenn. And again, we'll share these slides with everyone and make sure that you have contact information as well if you'd like to follow up. But with that, we'd like to go ahead and shift to our next speaker, Brian Fahey, Transit Administrator for Go Triangle. And I'd like to turn it over to you, Brian, to go ahead and walk us through our next segment.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Brian Fahey, Transit Administrator with Go Triangle. And I'm just going to walk you through what we're doing in the Triangle with our mobile ticketing implementation, which is a form of contactless fare payment in the Triangle. You can move to the next slide, please. Go ahead, next slide. And so the mobile ticketing project is actually a collaboration between Go Triangle, the City of Raleigh, City of Durham, and Town of Cary, also with funding partners of Wake, Durham, and Orange counties, and partnering with Campo and DCHCMTO. Next slide. Just a brief background where mobile ticketing came about. It actually is a result of a regional fare integration study that was conducted in 2018. And we're actually just very fortunate that the benefits of the system align with the operational and safety challenges that we're facing due to the pandemic. The primary goals of the study were to improve pass distribution and sales. That includes options, pricing, discounts, and aligning fares and passes to make everything consistent across all locations. To balance revenue and ridership goals. Increasing ridership is obviously a priority in adjusting fares. However, we want to balance revenue and ensuring financial stability and sustainability across the region. And improving the passenger experience. This is with, to make the process easier, consistent fare pricing, discount policies, and fare media that's available. And making the actual experience for the passengers simple when they board the bus. Another primary goal is to make transit an affordable option. And the primary thing that came out of the study was the feasibility recommendation to do fare capping. I'm sure most probably know what fare capping is, but just in general, it's actually a fare policy that basically when someone, especially someone with lower income, they usually do not have the funds, expendable funds to purchase a subsidized pass up front, say a monthly pass. What fare capping does is once a person reaches a certain threshold, let's say the cost of a daily pass, weekly pass, or monthly pass, in paying their fares, they're actually capped and they do not have to pay. for the rest of the period. And then next slide, please. So the major outcome was, number one, the alignment of our fare policies, and then obviously to implement and integrate mobile ticketing, fare capping, and smart cards. So a joint RFP was issued, Go Triangle issued on behalf of Raleigh, Cary, and Durham for a mobile ticketing solution in July of 2019. And then the partners selected the TouchPass system from Delarock Inc. They're actually now owned by Cubic Corporation. The primary goals of our project align with the fare study, providing convenience to our customers, increasing the distribution network, creating a platform where fare capping can be applied, and basically where fare capping is automated in the system, and there's no overhead or administrative cost. And then obviously to improve efficiency and decreasing boarding times and increasing on-time performance. Next slide. So the TouchPass system is account-based fare collection. And what this means, this was something that the Triangle we were very interested in. And a lot of ticketing solutions, the actual fare media or stored value is on a person's mobile phone. With account-based, their mobile phone or smart card is just the medium. And once they scan it, it's actually accessing a database in a matter of milliseconds and verifying the customer has the funds or the pass and returns that to the reader. It's available through mobile app and smart card. It's a cloud hosted solution and the transactions are in real time. Another thing that was important for the Triangle was that it's scalable for other services such as Future BRT in Wake County. Paratransit, we're actually implementing this system on the Go Durham Access paratransit and county on-demand system. And we're also looking at the option of doing it for the Go Wake Access on-demand system. And then it's scalable also for other county services that as they choose to join on. Next slide. The very high level benefits of the system are, as I mentioned, automating fare capping. Customers can easily purchase their fare products and their stored value online or through the app. It's contactless payment, which is a huge benefit during the COVID era. And basically the customer is scanning the QR code on their phone or their smart card and are really not even touching a reader or interacting with the operator. And another benefit of the system is the ability to use promotional codes or paper tokens. Paper tokens are simply little cards with a QR code. These can be are typically used for single ride or multi-ride passes that can be issued at a customer service window. As well as the promotional codes, which are codes that can be entered through the app or assigned to the smart card. And there are also things we can do on the TDM side. If we want to do direct mailings, let's say an example of offering a free ride on the bus, and the QR code is actually on the direct mailing piece, and the person simply scans that mailing piece and doesn't have to do anything else. In addition, the system also offers an API. So for future purchase of ticket vending machines, the API can integrate directly with the system. Another huge benefit is of our system that's moving forward is the incorporation and integration with InComm Reload Network. InComm is simply a merchant service that's at many retail locations throughout the country. There are approximately 150 retail locations in the Triangle. These include larger stores such as Walmart, CVS, Walgreens, Dollar Tree, and Dollar General, as well as other convenience stores. The customer would actually have the ability to add value to their account at any of these locations, which basically expands our distribution network greatly from where it is now. And then the other benefit is actually an error on the slide, but it's with our GoPass and Youth GoPass program administration. GoPass is simply a region-wide program. It's an employee or university pass that's offered. And it would actually, the universities or employers administer the program. They would have a simple portal to administer passes through the smart card or the app, as well as our Youth Go Pass program, which is issued at county library locations, parks and rec, that allows youth 13 to 18 to ride free throughout the Triumph. And then the final large benefit for us is that the app actually is able to integrate with other systems. And now we can actually truly be multimodal through one app. So that includes journey planning, where you're actually combining trip planning and real-time information and live directions for anywhere you want to go, the mobile payments and fare collection, micro-mobility, the customer has the ability to look, book, and pay for easy access to the first last mile service providers, such as scooters, TNCs, and the technology can adjust to different service delivery models. Loyalty and rewards programs can be part of it. And then actually mobility intelligence, which is really a way for us to make sense of all the big data that the system provides and being able to make sound decisions when it comes to fare policy. Next slide. So our current timeline, we're implementing it now. We're actually going through hardware installation of the readers on the vehicles, as well as software configuration, mainly with fare policy. And we actually began this process in the spring, and obviously COVID hit at the wrong time. But when we actually resumed fare collection, when we all have operator barriers installed, because currently we're actually doing rear door boardings. And so a huge safety element is ensuring we have the barriers installed. And the timing of the new app all are kind of driving our implementation timeline. We're planning to have an internal testing period in October, along with the soft launch with a select user group in November, December, with a full launch on January 2nd.
So thank you, Brian. We really appreciate that presentation, and we will make it available to everyone, and make sure that you have Brian's contact information along with Glenn's. So really appreciate it, and we'll hold questions for right now. What we'd like to do is we'll advance to the next slide, is that we're going to give you all a break. We're going to resume at 10 o'clock. So we're going to shift to having you go into some small group sessions to explore these innovations, a little more detailed discussion, and then have you prioritize these. So we'll resume at 10 o'clock, and we'll see you all shortly. Okay, welcome back, everyone. We are going to resume and get started to the next segment of our program this afternoon or this morning. What I'd like to do is give you a preview of what we'll be doing into breakouts, and then we're going to send you into the breakout segments. So again, we're going to be focusing in on 4 challenge areas that Jim Westmoreland walked through with you earlier. We appreciate everyone signing up to participate in one of these 4 challenge areas and the innovations within them. And we've done our very best to get you into either your top choice or second choice. So we'll put you into one of these. And in each of the breakouts, as Jim walked through, we have a set of innovations that you helped generate from our initial meeting. And in each of those innovations, a facilitator is going to walk through a description of what this idea is. So you'll have a chance to hear a little more about it, make sure that you can ask questions for clarification, and we'll walk through those in your breakout session. Again, you're just going to be working with one of the 4 challenge areas. So we'll have 4 sessions, and in each session, it'll look like this, that you'll have a chance to explore these innovations and descriptions, talk about them, ask questions. And then what we're going to have you do is talk about which of these ideas you like and why. We're going to have you then prioritize your top 2 in a virtual whiteboard. So we're going to invite you to come into the whiteboard and do some prioritization. And then we're going to come back together and we're going to have a chance to hear from each of the breakout group facilitators about what the priorities are. So this is a really important part of the session. It will help us understand, help the DOT team understand what are those innovations that are most important to get started? What are the most important innovations to work on? And so we're excited to have you all participate in that. So we're going to be in our breakout for about 30 minutes, and then we'll come back together as a full group. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Maddie to go ahead and put us into our breakout rooms. We are going to share the boards from each of the breakout rooms, and we're going to ask each of the facilitators to share the highlights of what came out of your breakout discussions. So we can see which group this was. This was safety. And I'd like to turn it over to Morven to go ahead and give a highlight of this group's work.
Great, thank you, Warren. So this is challenge number 1. How do we keep our passengers and employees safe during COVID? And we had some close results here in this category. We did have a winner. Number 1 was the Transit Cleaning Accreditation Program with 11 votes. So many people felt that that was very important, that everyone's cleaning to a standard, and that also that can be used to really market that, push it out to riders to build their confidence and getting back onto transit and rebuilding some of the ridership that we've seen decline. So number 1 was number 2, the Transit Cleaning Accreditation Program. And then as you can see, really close between 3, 4, and 5, the air filtration systems won out by just 1 vote. And that is to explore new technologies for either onboard buses or in facilities to try to clean the air. That's sort of a longer term focus, but it's also really just right now practical guidance on how to open windows, how to get ventilation where we can, maybe run the AC systems on high. That was felt to be important. Very, very close between vehicle design changes, and many of our participants felt that while they've been retrofitting vehicles to the best of their ability, there's really a lot that can be done in terms of working with the bus manufacturers to find out what they're going to recommend and how vehicle design will change as a result of COVID. So, and also number 3 was also of interest. So I think we've got great input to move forward in challenge number 1.
Great, thanks, Morven. So we'll go to challenge area 2. How can we offset ridership declines due to COVID-19?
Thanks, Warren. So number 4 actually came out on top as one of our top ones in the voting. And one of the primary reasons people voted on that is we talked about an app that could screen riders beforehand for symptoms of COVID. And so that was kind of a big thing that potentially if you can add it to its own app or a real-time bus tracking app, that could be very beneficial to screen passengers or kind of give them a reminder of if they're feeling any of these symptoms, that would be important to note and to stay home that day. It also might be a way for people to self-report if in the event that they find out they were COVID positive, you could report as well. So maybe as a way of contact tracing. Number 1 was also one that stood out to us, new marketing techniques. And we had a great idea emerged during our discussion that talked about maybe recreating the UNC graphic that showed the effectiveness of using masks and social distancing and opening windows, but from the passenger's perspective. So maybe there's a way that we could create a graphic to help communicate how these things help to keep passengers safe as well. And so those were some of the great things that came out during our discussion.
Great, thanks, Rachel. So let's go to the 3rd group. How can revenues and funding lost as a result of COVID-19?
Hey everybody, this is Jim. We decided we need to do more fishing off the coast, and that's a good way to increase revenues. No, I'm serious. we had a good conversation about the different innovations and priorities that were identified for this category. Basically ended up selecting number 3 and number 5. It was pretty close in terms of the top choices. Leave it right there for a minute, Warren, in terms of, or Maddie, go back to that point. Just the different elements there that are identified for number 3. It was discussed about the fact of, with the loss of both SMAP and ROPE money, that it would be helpful in terms of information and data collected and sharing that information both with local elected officials and state officials. So the whole concept of data collection and statewide sort of uniformity about how we do that was identified as important. Chris and our group from the MPO and Raleigh area identified an issue about standardization, standards versus standardization, and the difference between those two related to how we might collect data and use data in the future. Number 5, about funding flexibility and strategies, was also identified as a top category item for us. And basically it was discussed sort of on twofold. One is we do need to look for ways to how we're able to use available funding and what that might mean for the systems going forward. And then we also had an excellent comment about some of the current complications of the billing process for COVID funding and how that is really difficult for certain systems and creating probably more challenges and issues than need to be created. So those were the top 2 items, 3 and 5.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jim. So our 4th group, how can we move to new service patterns as needs evolve?
Great, thank you. We had such a great discussion around statewide technology capacity and abilities that we barely got through all of ours. We actually only had 4 innovations, and so we thought of statewide technology deployment, integration, and scheduling and forecasting innovations as one. In a lot of ways, we talked a lot about the differences in around the state, whereas some, especially when it comes to software, where some locations are a little farther along and some are still using paper systems. And so having some support in terms of pushing technology forward would be beneficial. There was also a lot of talk around expansion of existing pilots, such as the Mobility for All pilot. And then thoughts around microtransit expansion, some concerns about whether that could be done statewide or not, but some potential benefits involved in that as well. So when we got to our voting, again, we sort of voted on 2 and 3 as one in terms of a statewide technology, scheduling, forecasting, innovation, and software deployment. And those got the most votes with 7 and 8. And then we had sort of a tie between the 2 expansions of pilots, which were the Mobility for All pilot, as well as the expanded use of microtransit or on-demand services. And so I guess 2, 3, and then Mobility for All, or maybe just an expansion of pilots in general.
Great, thanks, Sahar. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Thanks everyone for participating in that. We really value your input and appreciate you taking the time to do that. I'm going to turn it back over to Jim.
Yeah, as Warren mentions, again, a big thank you to everybody who participated today and has been with us over the course of the project, starting with the survey and then the first meeting that we held in July the 22nd. I think today's discussion was good, both in terms of the speakers that we heard from as well as the breakout groups. And I think that we're getting there. If you recall the slide that I showed that sort of identified how we used the survey to identify initial ideas and now how we're going through the process of honing those ideas down into our top priorities. We're really focused on moving forward and coming up with information that we think will be useful both to the systems who are participating in the DOT, and then a big thanks to our MPO, RPO partners who are with us today as well. We know that as we track down this point of implementation, that your support and value in terms of what you can help us out with is going to be appreciated. Next slide, please. So here's an announcement for today. there's been a lot of conversation as we've gone through this around this project and things that we can collect and share directly with the system. So the DOT has stood up a website that we'll call the NC Transit Cares Repository. It has information in it, both from the meetings that we've had to date, survey results, information in terms of supportive resources on COVID-19 that are out there, both helpful resources and best practices. So this link, connectnc.gov/business/transit pages, Transit Cares ASPX, will lead you directly to this repository of information for your use. And I think it also can be accessed through the DOT website. I don't know that fully. Ryan might be able to comment on that. But this will be available for your use. We'll continue to populate it with other information as things go forward. Next slide, please. So in closing, our next step, really, we will, as we talked about today, we will be sending out through NCDOT some information to all of our transit system participants to basically help us even further sort of prioritize the top 8 innovations that we've come up with today between now and September the 23rd. So where everybody was in a breakout group today, we came up with our top 2. The next challenge will be to sort of prioritize 1 through 8, those top innovations. Each one of the 8 innovations identified today will be used, and we'll talk some because I know that there was some close competition out there between different innovations, but each one of the innovations will be further developed into what we're calling a summary implementation plan that will really sort of be the focus of what we need to do as a next step, how both the state will participate in the implementation, how the individual systems can participate in the implementation. So what you can expect when we get together on November the 18th at the Launch It meeting is information related to each one of the different 8 innovations that we've developed. Again, we had thought about that initially being an in-person meeting. Now it's going to be a virtual meeting, so we'll try to summarily sort of pull information together where it's hopefully interesting, and I don't know that we'll need the full 3 hours that we have allocated for it. But really, it's to provide a higher level overview of the project. It's to go through each one of the 8 innovations and talk about implementation and next steps. And then we're hopeful that we'll have some special guests from NCDOT appear and provide some information about what the state is looking to do to help sort of further this work and effort. But I wanted to again sort of echo what Julie said at the beginning of how much we appreciate and value each one of you for taking your time and participating in this process with us. I also would be remiss if I didn't recognize David Rue and the partnership that we have with NCPTA. It's extremely important and helpful, and David does a great job with hearing from each one of the represented transit systems in the state and pulling the information for you to both have and to share with your elected officials locally and from a statewide perspective. So David, thank you for your participation in that. So with that, I wanted to wish everybody a good day. Thank you for your participation. If there's any additional questions that you have, you can feel free to email Ryan at NCDOT, and he will be glad to get answers for your questions. And also do go and look up the repository. I think Ryan sent a link to that as I was sitting here sort of talking just a minute ago. Go to that repository and sort of check it out and see. Let us know what you like and what additional suggestions or ideas that you may have for it. But again, thanks everyone for your participation. We will have the information posted on that website repository as well. And with that, I will wish everybody a good day, good afternoon, and thanks again for your time. Thank you, everybody.